A 400-acre park along Cole Harbour, the estuary, is an incredibly popular place for hiking and exploring. The very popular Salt Marsh Trail runs right through the park. On the west side is old farmland, and some of that land harkens back to a time when one group of people was locked away. The Cole Harbour Heritage Park is where I'm on my walkabout today. The Poor Farm Road is the route I'll be traveling today. It's in this provincial park, built and still maintained by the Cole Harbour Parks and Trails Association. The origins go back to the 1970s, when it was determined that new parks and active transportation corridors would be needed to meet the needs of a growing residential population in the area. The park offers a number of trails and connects in a number of directions to the Trans-Canada Trail sections, all of it along Cole Harbour and its Salt Marsh estuary. This part of the park crosses land which once housed two different farms, as well as some other properties. The section of trail I'm traveling now is a connector on the Trans-Canada Trail. Behind me, it connects to a paved section across Bissett Road and towards Forest Hills. In front of me, the trail continues on to the intersection of the Salt Marsh Trail to the east and the Shearwater Flyer Trail. I'm about to turn off the Trans-Canada Trail section and onto the Poor Farm Road. Now, just about at this intersection, at one time, there was an inn for travelers. It was called the Ware Inn or the Weir Inn. There are two different spellings in the history books. Now, that was an inn that catered to travelers who were headed up and down the eastern shore, as well as sportsmen who would come hunting in the Cole Harbour estuary. It's said that the future King George V once stayed here on a hunting trip. Prince George, grandson of Queen Victoria, would become king in 1910, and he made two visits to Nova Scotia, one in 1883 while serving in the Atlantic Fleet of the Royal Navy, and once in 1901 when he returned with his wife, Mary, the Duchess of York, who would go on to become Queen Mary. Prince George's hunting trip here more than likely occurred on the latter visit, given his naval commitments probably wouldn't have afforded him the opportunity to head out on what would have been, at the time, a lengthy trip from Halifax. This connection here is the old costly farm trail, and if you follow it, much like the Trans-Canada Trail section, it will take you to the Salt Marsh Trail. And as you travel along, you will pass the remains of the old costly farm itself. There's not much there anymore. There are some foundation elements and some apple trees which seem out of place in a forest, and that's all that marks what was once a thriving family farm. The other of the two farms that was once located in this park was the Halifax County Poor Farm, or the Poor's Farm. It's sometimes thought by visitors to be named much like the costly farm, reflecting the surnames of the farm owners, but it isn't. Rather, it reflects the people who lived here and the name of a facility that once stood on the land overlooking the Cole Harbour estuary. The Poor's Farm was established here in 1897, and it was a place that housed people who were known at the time as harmless insane. That included a wide range of people with diseases like Tourette's, multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy. It included unwed mothers, it included the aged. There was such a range of people here. Now, that trail that I was just traveling along was once a road that took you to a collection of dormitories and the working farm that housed 90 or so people at a time. It's worth stepping back and understanding the time and age in which such a place as the poorhouse would have existed. In 1897, social services like public health care and disability support were all but non-existent. Throughout the Victorian age, the solution to dealing with people who had illnesses, were old or indigent, was to lock them away. This wasn't entirely new. The first poorhouse in Halifax opened on what would become Spring Garden Road in 1752. But it was mainly a workhouse for petty criminals. It was in the Victorian age that the poorhouse, as a way to deal with a wider range of people, really expanded. Locking people away is probably the best description, as the residents of these facilities were referred to as inmates. This was not the sort of place that they could come and go from at will. Once there, the odds of someone leaving before they passed away was close to zero. It was commonplace across North America and Europe to build poorhouses, often called poor asylums. In most cases, people residing at the facilities were put to work. Poorhouses largely operated as self-contained communities. There was a famous poorhouse in Halifax at the corner of Roby and South Street that underscores just how tragic these places could be. It opened in 1869 to great acclaim, but in 1882 a fire started in the kitchen and rapidly ripped through the building dormitories. The residents, or inmates, were locked in the building, but fortunately nearby citizens were able to break down the doors, and hundreds of women, infants, elderly, and others fled the fire. 31 people still died. The Halifax Morning Chronicle reported the next day that the fire was, quote, the most distressing affair of the kind that ever occurred in Halifax. The building was completely destroyed, and 2 years later the Royal Engineers detonated the remnants of the building, and a new poorhouse was constructed on the site. The tragedy at Halifax's poorhouse did not put an end to the idea of locking up the city's most inconvenient citizens, and not just reconstructing Halifax's poorhouse, but building others as well. Not too far from here, outside the city, out of sight, out of mind, the Halifax County Poor Farm was constructed, where again, people were put, or placed, if you will, to live out their lives. And it is in this place that when people died, they were buried in shallow graves. It is those graves and the continuing story of the Halifax County Poor Farm that I'll continue after the break.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
I'm at the Cole Harbour Heritage Park on the Poor Farm Road. Now I'm heading to a site that was once the location of a number of dormitories and a working farm that was home to people in the city who had various illnesses, and of course the poor. It was a legacy of Victorian age thinking about people who were sick or simply didn't have any money. One of the things about poorhouses is many of the people died there and went unclaimed. In fact, in Holy Cross Cemetery in Halifax, over 20,000 people are buried who had lived in the city's poorhouses. And here in this park, there are the graves, shallow graves, of some of the people who died on this location. It's believed about 300 people died at the Halifax County Poor Farm. Many of those who died at the site were sent back to their home communities. However, at least 40, and perhaps many, many more, are buried at a small site near the water's edge. The official records in the Halifax archives list far fewer people as buried by the county than the number of graves which are visible on this site, or the number of graves discovered through the use of ground-penetrating radar. These crosses do not mark the actual graves on this site. Rather, they were placed here by the Department of Natural Resources to give the public an idea of the extent of the grave site itself. There are some long depressions in the ground just behind me. Those mark actual graves where the caskets and the grave itself have collapsed over time. And in front of me, this very large depression was the site of the dead house. A dead house was a place that bodies were stored over the winter while they waited for the ground to thaw, thus making it possible to dig the graves, shallow as they were. In 2007, St. Mary's University conducted a number of investigations here to better understand the burials and the poor farm overall. Here in the cemetery, 5 test pits were opened and 4 graves were identified to be examined. One included the remains of a young girl aged somewhere between 12 and 15. In examining the grave shafts using test digs and radar, it was found that the burial depths were very shallow. One reached just over a meter, one less than half a meter, not even close to the standard expected for burials. While rocky ground was almost certainly part of the challenge in burying deep here, other sites on these lands could have been chosen which would have allowed for deeper burials. And the shallow graves were a common hallmark of poorhouse burials, where the care of residents in life and death wasn't always a top priority. The problem of shallow burials of poorhouse deceased was so prevalent that in Halifax's Holy Cross Cemetery, a sign had to be put up reminding caretakers that graves must be at least 5 feet in depth. The field above me was the site of the dormitories for the Halifax County Poor Farm. Now, for all the failings of the idea of locking up the sick and the poor, if you had to find yourself in a poorhouse, this would have been a much nicer location to be than the poorhouse on the Halifax Peninsula. On the peninsula, people would have spent almost all of their time indoors. Here, being a working farm, people would have had the opportunity to be outside and would have had the fresh air and the views across the Cole Harbour estuary. Nonetheless, it was not an easy life here. The inmates, as they were called at the time, cared for livestock and grew produce, which was sold to local citizens to help fund operations here. The site has been called Rambling. A series of buildings, some of them repurposed and moved to the site, connected together to form living quarters, which were essentially institutional-style dormitories. It was in this area that there was a rock-lined reservoir to store water for drinking and irrigation on the Poor Farm. Now, the reason for that, of course, is the location next to the Salt Marsh estuary. You would not have wanted to use salt water for either irrigation or drinking. It is said that that reservoir was 60 meters in diameter. The facility here operated under the auspices of a committee who were supposed to oversee operations. There were live-in superintendents as well, managing day-to-day operations. Occasionally, controversy would erupt as committee members or citizens would question the spending at the site, whether too much was being spent on residents, or alternatively, whether money appropriated for the facility was being used to benefit residents at all. It was a similar story at many such sites across North America. These were, after all, for the most part, people who generally didn't have anyone who cared much for them. The Poor's Farm was renamed to the seemingly friendlier Halifax County home in 1910. And 19 years later, in 1929, a fire raced through the building here, much in the same way that happened at the Halifax poorhouse. But unlike in Halifax, all 140 residents who were living here survived that fire. A fire which spread because of the type of dormitories and the breezeways that connected them all. Many of the residents were relocated to the newly rebuilt and renamed Halifax City Home, which was located at the corner of Roby and South Street. In 1941, a new facility was constructed across Bissett Road, known as the Halifax County Home and Mental Hospital. Until 1945, it was managed by the same committee who managed the Halifax County Poor Farm. In 1952, it became the Halifax County Hospital, and by the end of that decade, it began to focus solely on the mentally ill, which resulted in Ocean View Manor being opened in 1960, which did not operate first as a seniors' home, but rather opened as a welfare home for indigent citizens. The hospital was ultimately renamed the Halifax County Rehabilitation Center and continued to operate until 2002, after which the property served many uses, including as a film set for the television series The Trailer Park Boys. There are many more trails in this park that you can explore, and whether you come here to immerse yourself in the history or you come to take in the spectacular views, this is a place that is wonderful to hike at any time of year. Now, not too far from here, at the inland end of the Cole Harbour estuary, there is a short trail that joins Lawrencetown to Cole Harbour. And it's on that trail that you can explore how those two communities developed so differently. That's after the break.
Won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
As you might imagine, a road called the Old Lawrencetown Road is a road that went to Lawrencetown, in this case from Halifax. These days, that road has been replaced by Highway 207, but two small orphan sections of the Old Lawrencetown Road still exist, one in Lawrencetown, one in Cole Harbour, and in between them, a trail which crosses what was the path that joined those orphan sections. The Old Lawrencetown Road is where I'm on my walkabout today. The Old Lawrencetown Road Trail was developed by the Lawrencetown Cole Harbour Trail Association as a connector between the Sunset Acres subdivision in Cole Harbour and the Ross Road area in Lawrencetown in 2014. At about 2 kilometers long, it's basically a straight 2-kilometer run, mostly used for connecting the two neighborhoods, but also, as it happens, neighborhoods in different communities, Lawrencetown and Cole Harbour. I started my journey today near the community of Lawrencetown. Lawrencetown these days, well, it's known for its great beaches and its surfing. It has a population of around 3,000 people. It was established as a formal settlement around the time of Father Le Loutre's War. It could be argued that the war is little known to most people because people familiar with Nova Scotia history would know of the various conflicts that occurred, but the name Father Le Loutre's War probably doesn't roll off the tongue for most. It ran for 6 years, from 1749 until 1755. Father Le Loutre's War has also been called the Indian War, the Mi'kmaq War, and the Anglo-Mi'kmaq War. The war began when Edward Cornwallis arrived and settled in Halifax, in an act that the Mi'kmaq felt violated treaties they had with the British. British officer Charles Lawrence and the New England Ranger John Gotham fought a series of battles against Father Jean-Louis Le Loutre, who was leading the Mi'kmaq and the French Acadian militia to conduct guerrilla raids on British forces and settlers. The connection of the war to this community may have struck you when I was talking about the British officer who was in charge, Charles Lawrence. He was a brigadier general and eventually governor of Nova Scotia. He's the one who ordered the expulsion of the Acadians in 1755. He'd spent a lot of time fighting the French, and he wanted them gone. Now, in the year before the expulsion order in 1754, Charles Lawrence offered up land to 20 families on the eastern shore in a community that they would call Lawrence's Town, or Lawrencetown. This was a period of time when one war seemed to blend into another war, and in April of 1754, the outbreak of the French and Indian War began when Joseph Broussard and a group of Mi'kmaq and Acadians left Chignecto to attack Lawrencetown. Keep in mind, while Lawrencetown was small, it was symbolic given it was the personal project of the governor. The raids on Lawrencetown began in May, and by August, the settlers had been evacuated to Halifax. The same thing would happen again in 1757 when the settlement once again had to be evacuated. Over time, things settled down, peace ensued, and Lawrencetown started to grow. The name Lawrencetown versus Lawrence's Town was not legally adopted until October 4th, 1921. It was then briefly changed to East Lawrencetown on July 3rd, 1952, which you will still see on some maps, but the name reverted back to Lawrencetown on April 5th, 1961. This trail largely sits at the end of Cole Harbour, the water body. and the salt marsh that's there. That estuary divides the communities of Cole Harbour and Lawrencetown. Now, their evolution couldn't be any more different. And even today, Lawrencetown is a center for water sports like surfing and beaches, and Cole Harbour is a commercial center. There is a very good reason why Cole Harbour grew faster than Lawrencetown, or anywhere east of the salt marsh and that water body. It wasn't until soldiers cut that first road through from Halifax to Lawrencestown in 1754, perhaps along this very route, where farms began to sprout up on the rich drumlins. Anyone needing to trade or do business in Halifax pretty much traveled from places on the eastern shore, east of the estuary, by boat, a long journey, and a difficult one in winter. But it was the only practical option. To travel by land meant getting around the estuary, often walking or riding long distances on roads, which were impassable for wheeled vehicles like ox carts and carriages. For this reason, if you were running a business or farm with the intent to grow and sell your wares, locating on the west side of the estuary made a lot more sense. The result of the settlement pattern remains visible today in the vast commercial and housing areas of Cole Harbour, despite the fact that roads have improved beyond the estuary to Lawrencetown and beyond. Cole Harbour developed as a bedroom community to Halifax. The farmers' markets in Halifax attracted farmers, and the farms became bigger and bigger. Cole Harbour Road became a major thoroughfare, and by following that road, you could get all the way into Dartmouth, and from there take the ferry to Halifax to sell your wares. Farming became such an enormous industry in the Cole Harbour area that by the late 19th century and early 20th century, farmers were beginning to experiment with hotbeds to extend the growing season. I have reached the end of this trail, and in doing so have traveled from Lawrencetown to Cole Harbour. These days, people wouldn't even think twice about heading from Dartmouth to Lawrencetown to go to the beach or to go surfing. And people in Lawrencetown wouldn't think twice about going the other way to do shopping. But over 200 years ago, this would have been quite the journey, and things would have been very different. And that's why these communities have developed in such different ways, ways that are still evident today. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "We are not makers of history, we are made by history." And if there's anywhere that is evident, it's looking at how these two communities developed. And it's something to think about wherever you are, whatever community you find yourself in on your next walkabout.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine. Hey.